In hardcore classic WoW, the dungeons found across Azeroth and the various threats within can prove to be several times more dangerous than those found throughout the world. A lack of proper group composition or poor foresight can make some dungeon enemies even more threatening than most bosses. Here's a list of the 10 deadliest dungeon enemies in hardcore classic WoW. This list will have a limit of 1 enemy per dungeon and will be in no particular order. Before the video starts, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you haven't already, because it really helps me out. With that being said, let's begin with the first entry. First up, we have the Lupine Horrors found within Shadowfang Keep. These are levels 23 to 25 ghost wolves found throughout the dungeon, and have one pretty tricky ability, and that is Summon Lupine Delusions. This ability will spawn 2 extra non-elite wolves to fight alongside them, which can be really bad, especially if you are fighting multiple horrors at once, so they should always be a priority target. Another bad thing about this enemy is that the rooms they spawn in are extremely dangerous, primarily the one where you can easily pull the entire room over a ledge, requiring you to run out of the dungeon almost guaranteed. This is one of the most dangerous rooms out of every dungeon in the game if you aren't paying attention, and the Lupine Horrors are a major reason for this, since they will spawn so many extra adds to fight if you do pull a lot of enemies in the room. Next up is the Stone Stewards found within Uldaman. These are level 44 elite golems that are found throughout the latter half of the dungeon, and are by far the scariest trash mobs found in here. These guys are dangerous for a few reasons. First is their 2-second AoE stun, which can be a real issue for the melee in your group. This wouldn't be terrible, but these enemies usually spawn in large packs surrounded by many dwarves. Additionally, some of these also patrol and are sizably tankier than other elites in the dungeon. All of these factors make these generally quite threatening, especially when accompanied by several other trash mobs. These guys are a large reason Uldaman is such a dangerous dungeon in hardcore when combined with the bosses like Arcadis and the Ancient Stonekeeper. Continuing, let's move on to the higher level dungeons, where there are a sizably larger amount of more threatening dungeon enemies, with many of them having a considerably large amount of dangerous abilities. First is the Risen Constructs that can be found within the Skullman's dungeon, which range from levels 58 to 61, and spawn in the room around Rattlegore. These enemies have multiple very dangerous abilities that combo very well together to create an extremely threatening enemy. First of all, these enemies have a Thrash, which makes kiting them too far very dangerous, and lets them do sizable chunks of damage very quickly. This is made worse by the Sweeping Strikes and Frontal Cone ability they have, which both make standing in melee, even near the tank, very precarious. These constructs tend to pretty often kill unsuspecting rogues or feral druids, since they tend to be fairly squishy but have to stay in melee range, and if they position wrong, they get cleaved down. To top it all off, these constructs possess an enrage for when they are on low health, further increasing their Thrash and Sweeping Strikes damage output. This is not even mentioning that these can be pulled on accident when trying to pull Rattlegore, who is a pretty dangerous boss by himself, so that further magnifies the danger and can make for some extremely bad situations. For another late game threat, we have the Crimson Battle Mages found in Stratholme on the living side. These enemies are levels 59 and 60 and can pack quite the punch even compared to most other endgame dungeon mobs. This is primarily due to the blast waves and arcane explosions these guys use, which do a very large amount of AoE damage very quickly, which can easily burst you down if you aren't careful. This puts a lot of pressure on your healers to keep everybody in the party topped up, especially the melee. This is made harder by the pretty hard-hitting Immolate these guys possess as well. Additionally, these enemies also tend to spawn in groups of at least 3 or 4 elites, with the other enemies not being pushovers either. So, if you target these enemies to prevent the large AoE damage, you still have the issues with the other enemies to contend with. Next, another fiery enemy to look at is the Fireguard Destroyers found in the Blackrock Depths dungeon, ranging from levels 54 to 56. The main threat these guys pose is the absurd amount of damage they do, even for players of an appropriate level. This is because they deal fire damage instead of physical, so they ignore the armor your character has, with the only way to reduce their damage being fire resist or fire protection potions. Two of these enemies can easily do a hefty amount of damage to your tank, putting strain on your healer, and this is combined with several additional adds usually, and can make the fights quite troublesome. If your tank cannot manage to keep aggro on these destroyers, odds are they will 2 or 3 shot most other members of your party, so they definitely need to be looked out for. The last of our endgame dungeon enemies can be found in Dire Maw, and those are the Gordog Brutes. First of all, I don't know why Blizzard gave these guys 7 different abilities. Like, that is more than most raid bosses in this game, and even if they aren't very complicated, it is still kind of funny. The main threat these brutes pose is the major damage output they can do on the tank, since they have a Sunder armor, a Mortal Strike to reduce their incoming healing, and an Enrage to greatly increase their attack speed. Even if there are even 2 or more adds, these brutes can pose a massive threat, and can cause your tank to have to even pop a defensive just to survive if they aren't well geared. Additionally, these mobs have a cleave, which can do pretty big damage to your melee DPS, and they have an interrupt, which shouldn't be a big deal since they should not be attacking anybody except your tank usually, but it should be noted. Dire Maw is notorious for its difficult trash mobs when it comes to hardcore, and while many of the enemies in here are dangerous with lots of scary abilities, I feel these were the most threatening. Continuing, we can look to Maraudon, where the Constrictor Vines there are surprisingly deadly. These are level 45 to 46 Lasher enemies that spawn in the orange side of the beginning of the dungeon. These enemies have 2 pretty dangerous abilities that complement each other quite well. First is a Thrash, which gives them very high burst damage and makes kiting them pretty much a no-go. Their second ability is an Entangling Roots, which is a crazy 15-second immobilization. These enemies also generally spawn in large packs of 3 or more enemies. Usually, the Constrictor Vines can either kill your tank with their Thrash ability, if 3 or more of them are aggroed onto them, since their damage output can get quite high, so the healer needs to be pre-healing the tank, because a lot of damage will be coming in. Additionally, if these vines start attacking players other than the tank, they can start stacking Thrash stacks and then root the ranged player, which will probably one-shot a Clothy if they are far enough away. Next, we can talk about the Dark Iron Agents, a very infamous group of enemies found in Nomergon, ranging from levels 32 to 33. These enemies have 3 big reasons for being extremely dangerous. First is the massive hallway they spawn in that is sectioned into an upper and lower floor, with it being extremely easy to accidentally pull the entire section of the hallway you aren't on, causing all of the enemies from that section to chase you and having a very high chance of wiping your group. The second reason is that these dwarves usually spawn in large packs of 4, but upwards of 6 enemies, which can be quite tricky to deal with in such a confined space. The third and most dangerous part of these enemies is their Dark Iron landmines, which they will place down and will arm after 10 seconds if not killed. These landmines, once armed, will explode if someone goes near them, and they do a massive amount of AoE fire damage that will almost one-shot most squishy characters. Usually these landmines are easy to kill, but with all the commotion that can happen in the hallway with the large enemy packs, these dwarves are surprisingly very threatening. To end off the video, we have some lower level dungeon enemies that are still precarious to deal with. First is the Druids of the Fang found in Wailing Caverns. These are level 19 to 20 enemies found throughout the entire Wailing Caverns dungeon and can be very tricky spellcasters to deal with. This is primarily because of their Druid Slumber ability, which is a 15-second sleep. This is extremely annoying if you don't have a Dispel from a priest, and if it goes on the healer, it can be very scary, especially when fighting large mob packs. Then they have a Healing Touch, which is quite annoying and prolongs the fights even more. Lastly, they have a Lightning Bolt, which hits decently hard. All of these abilities can be interrupted, but require your entire group to pay attention, and can get very hard to manage when fighting 2 of these druids at the same time. If 2 players get slept at the same time, the odds of the combat turning south increase exponentially, and this makes the Druids of the Fang very hard to deal with at these early levels. The final enemy for this video is going to be the Defias Squall Shapers found in the Dead Mines. These enemies are found on the boat in the final area of the dungeon, and are tricky to deal with spellcasters in tandem with the large mob packs in this area of the dungeon. This is primarily because these Squall Shapers have a Frost Nova, which is an AoE 8-second root. This is a very dangerous ability to have, since it is pretty easy to pull enemies vertically in this part of the dungeon, causing running to be an often needed tactic to avoid death. These Squall Shapers also have a Fire Blast, which does pretty good damage, just for some extra ranged kill power. These mobs work best in tandem with other enemies, since they can root, slow with frost armor, and overall just make running a hassle. Even if this boat has a lot of reset spots for safety, they can sometimes be hard to get to in the first place because of these Squall Shapers, and for that reason they are on this list. And that concludes the video on 10 of the deadliest dungeon enemies in WoW Classic Hardcore. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Leave a comment below if there are any enemies you think deserve a spot on the list. Anyways, I'm out.